Okay, so we all think we know the big names when it comes to mythological creatures, right? But what if I told you one of the most famous monster trios in history is actually hiding a secret? That one of its members basically crashed the party, like centuries late. Today, we are solving a monster menu mystery, the case of the missing Ziz.
So to get what this mystery is all about, we have to start at the end of the world, specifically with a meal called the Sudat Shiat Hamatim. This is the legendary Messianic feast for the righteous. And it's not just any dinner party, it's a massive celestial banquet meant to symbolize God's final total victory over all chaos. And the main course? Well, it's literally the stuff of legends.
If you've heard of this feast, you've probably heard of the big three. You've got Leviathan, the untouchable chaos monster of the sea. Then there's Behemoth, the absolute master of the land. And rounding out the trio, the Ziz, the colossal king of the sky. It's a perfect set, right? Land, sea, air. They represent the whole untamed world, finally served up to celebrate a brand new divine order. Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, well, not so fast, because here's the thing. When you dig into the oldest, the most foundational texts that actually talk about this feast, you find a really shocking omission. It turns out one of these famous creatures wasn't even on the original invitation list. So, let's put on our textual detective hats for a minute. We're going to go back to the earliest accounts and see who was actually supposed to be on the menu at this ridiculously epic meal.
And what you find is pretty amazing. The consistency in these really old texts is just striking. You look at the Book of Enoch from as far back as 300 BCE, and it mentions two monsters, Behemoth and Leviathan. Fast forward a few hundred years to 4 Ezra and 2 Baruch, and guess what? It's the same story. Two monsters, created together, separated, and destined to become food at the end of days. And who's missing? Any mention of a giant bird? Anywhere.
I mean, 2 Baruch is about as direct as it gets. It says that Leviathan and Behemoth will be food for all who remain. That's it. The statement feels so final, so complete. The purpose of these 2 beasts is spelled out perfectly, cementing a tradition that was built entirely on a pair, not a trio.
And this two-monster tradition doesn't just stop there. It carries right on into the most detailed, most authoritative rabbinic source on the whole subject, the Babylonian Talmud. The main discussion, the locus classicus, is in a section called Bava Batra, and it goes into wild detail about the feast, describing how they'll eat Leviathan's flesh, use its skin to build tents, but again, the Ziz is totally MIA.
So here's the crucial point. You might be thinking, well, isn't that an incomplete set? But in the ancient worldview, it wasn't. It was perfect. Leviathan and Behemoth together represented the totality of the chaotic, untamed world, everything that wasn't the ordered heavens. Defeating them and eating them was a symbol of complete victory. A third creature just wasn't necessary for the symbolism to hit home. This two-part symbol, this dyad, was already the whole story. So, if the Ziz wasn't on the original guest list, where on earth did it come from? Well, as it turns out, this amazing bird had its own totally separate story going on. Let's follow that trail for a bit.
And when you look at their textual origins, it is like night and day. Leviathan and Behemoth are the stars of entire chapters in the book of Job. They get these long, vivid, absolutely terrifying descriptions. The Ziz, on the other hand, its whole biblical foundation rests on a single, super ambiguous phrase from the Psalms, Ziz Sadai, which a lot of scholars just translate as wild beasts of the field. So from the very beginning, its scriptural footing was way, way shakier.
And because the Ziz wasn't anchored down in the book of Job with the other two, its mythology just kind of grew on its own. It became this free-floating legend, a standalone marvel of creation, for sure, but it wasn't textually tied to that all-important feast at the end of days.
And the legends that grew around it were just wow. There's one story in the Talmud that says a single Ziz egg fell out of its nest, and when it broke, the yolk flooded 60 cities. 60. That just gives you a sense of the sheer cosmic scale we're talking about here.
And there's another story about sailors who see the Ziz just standing in the middle of the ocean with the water only up to its ankles. They think, hey, the water's shallow here. But a voice from heaven warns them that a carpenter once dropped his axe in that very spot, and it took 7 full years to hit the bottom.
So, what we have are 2 completely separate traditions running on parallel tracks. The feast with 2 monsters, and this incredible, legendary giant bird. So, how did they finally get together? This is the moment a trio is finally born.
So that's the million-dollar question, right? After centuries of being left off the guest list, when did the Ziz finally get its invitation to the feast?
And here it is. This is basically the smoking gun. For almost 1,000 years, from Enoch all the way to the Babylonian Talmud, it's just the two beasts. But then, around 750 CE, everything changes. In a text called The Apocalypse of Simeon Bar Yochai, for the very first time, the Ziz appears right alongside Leviathan and Behemoth as part of the feast. This new, improved version was then picked up and solidified in later medieval collections like the Yalkut Shimoni.
So, why the change? Well, the motivation seems to be a desire for what you could call cosmic symmetry. The original pair was symbolically complete, sure, but a trio of sea, land, and air, it's just so neat. It's so aesthetically pleasing. Later authors, probably wanting to harmonize all these great traditions, saw the amazing Ziz legend and realized it was the perfect missing piece to create a truly comprehensive statement about God's power over every single part of creation.
So let's bring it all home. This whole case of the missing Ziz isn't just some fun, nerdy trivia. It's actually a perfect case study of how myths and traditions grow and change over time.
You can see the process laid out so clearly. You start with a powerful foundation, the land and sea pair. At the very same time, but on a totally separate track, this magnificent sky legend starts to develop. And then, hundreds of years later, creative authors and compilers harmonize them, mashing them together to create that perfect, complete trio we know today.
And that's the ultimate takeaway, really. The Ziz wasn't missing from the original story, it was added. And that shows us that traditions aren't these static things carved in stone. They're living, breathing stories with new layers added by different generations to fit what mattered to them.
Which kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. This process of combining and harmonizing stories didn't just stop in the Middle Ages. It's happening right now, all around us, in the stories we tell and the characters we mash up. So the real question is, what modern myths are we creating today? And what are they going to look like 1,000 years from now?